Hey guys, this morning we stand together in the quiet glow of sunrise, where the air feels soft and the sky is brushed with colors only God could paint. The first light slips across your window, and in that gentle warmth, you sense His presence whispering, "Today is new. Today is mine." You wonder, what if God has something extraordinary planned for you before this day ends? What if the answer you've been longing for is already unfolding? And let's be real, without His grace, you probably won't even survive that first sip of overly strong coffee. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to drop in the comments what your morning looks like. Do you hear birds, traffic, or maybe just the hum of your own thoughts? Now, take a deep breath, feel the morning light on your face, and let's begin today's prayer together. You notice how even in ancient Rome, believers greeted the sunrise with hymns of praise. Historians still argue whether those early gatherings shaped what we now call morning liturgy. A quirky fact? Monks once measured daylight hours by how long it took incense to burn. And here you are, wrapped in God's morning peace, ready to trust Him. You breathe deeply, and the crisp morning air feels almost alive, carrying a quiet message from God straight into your heart. As light streams through the window, you sense His gentle reminder that every new day is an invitation to trust Him again. You ask yourself, what if today isn't just ordinary? What if today holds the very turning point you've prayed for? In moments like this, faith becomes less about knowing every detail and more about resting in the God who already knows your story's ending. Did you know that early Christians often greeted one another with the words, "The Lord is risen," at dawn? Not only on Easter, but on ordinary mornings too? Historians still argue whether this practice began in Jerusalem or spread later through Antioch. But either way, it shows how strongly believers tied mornings to fresh hope. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval villages rang bells at sunrise, not only to call people to prayer, but to chase away what they believed were lingering night spirits. You smile, realizing that for you, the rising sun isn't just light. It's a daily symbol that darkness never wins. As the warmth touches your skin, you feel God's love anchoring you in the certainty that everything will indeed be fine. You let that thought settle in, and suddenly the story of Joseph comes alive in your morning reflections. You picture him in a dim prison cell, forgotten by men, but never by God, waiting through nights that must have felt endless. Yet one dawn shifted everything. He was lifted from chains to stand before Pharaoh, a prisoner transformed into a ruler. As you watch the sunlight creep higher now, you remember that your own darkest seasons are not the end. They may be the soil where God is preparing a palace moment you cannot yet see. Historically, Egypt's prisons were often underground, damp, and suffocating. Historians still argue whether Joseph's dungeon was part of a fortress or a storage pit, but what they all agree on is that it was no place for dreams. And here's a quirky detail. Ancient Egyptians sometimes carved tally marks into prison walls to track time. Joseph may have stared at such marks, wondering if his life had been forgotten. Yet God's morning always came. The same God who lifted Joseph from despair lifts you too. As the light streams across your room, you realize He is writing your story with the same careful hand. Your prison of fear or doubt is never permanent when God is near. You carry Joseph's story in your heart as your eyes follow the sun's climb. And now Moses steps into view. Another reminder that God writes freedom into morning skies. You imagine him, once a fugitive shepherd in Midian, suddenly called by God through a burning bush that glowed like fire but was never consumed. Just as this dawn feels unstoppable, so too was God's plan to lead His people from the chains of Egypt into the promise of freedom. You feel your own spirit stirring, because if God could split seas for Moses, surely He can carve a path through your obstacles. History tells us that Egypt's pharaohs used forced labor to build cities and monuments. Historians still argue whether Israel's slavery occurred under Ramses II or an earlier dynasty, but the echoes of oppression are clear. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some scholars note that reeds from the Nile were used to make papyrus scrolls. The very river where Moses was drawn as a baby later became the setting for Israel's liberation journey. As you watch the morning deepen, the call is unmistakable. Your Red Sea may look impossible, but God's hand is never short. The sunrise whispers freedom, and you sense Him leading you one step at a time toward promise. The morning grows brighter, and your thoughts drift to David, the shepherd boy whose life proves that God notices what others overlook. You picture him on a hillside, dew still clinging to the grass, his harp in hand as he sang to the Lord while sheep grazed nearby. Nobody expected the youngest son, tucked away with the animals, to rise as king. Yet God's light always finds its chosen vessel, just as today's sunlight warms your face. You realize that even in obscurity, God has been shaping your heart, building strength where the world sees insignificance. Archaeological records show that shepherding was one of the oldest professions in ancient Israel. Historians still argue whether David's famous Psalms were written entirely during his youth or compiled later, but all agree his words carry the fragrance of those early mornings. And here's a quirky detail. Shepherds often rubbed oil on sheep's heads to protect them from insects, perhaps the inspiration behind David's psalm about the Lord anointing his head with oil. As you feel the day unfolding, David's journey reassures you. Your hidden seasons are not wasted. The God who trained David's hands with a sling and his heart with songs is the same God preparing you for victories you cannot yet imagine. The sun climbs higher, and you remember the greatest story of all. Jesus carrying his cross through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, the world shrouded in darkness that seemed final. Yet, from the agony of that day, came the dawn of resurrection, the most radiant morning the earth has ever seen. You breathe deeply, realizing that if God could transform a brutal cross into a symbol of eternal life, then He can certainly transform your pain into purpose. Each sunrise whispers this same truth. Despair never has the last word. Historical records note that crucifixion was a Roman punishment reserved for rebels and the lowest criminals. Historians still argue whether Jesus was executed in 30 or 33 AD, but all agree it happened under Pontius Pilate's rule. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some early Christians used the fish symbol instead of the cross, partly because the cross carried such terror during those years. Imagine how astonishing it is that today the cross is a universal emblem of hope. As the morning light grows golden, you sense that your own trials may feel like crosses, heavy and sharp. Yet with God's power, even your suffering can become the soil of resurrection. The sunrise reminds you everything will be fine. The golden light softens as you think about your own anxious nights, those hours when silence feels heavier than noise. You know the feeling of lying awake, the ceiling becoming a blank canvas where worries sketch themselves over and over. Finances, health, relationships, the uncertain future. But as the dawn breaks, you realize those restless shadows lose their power when exposed to God's light. The same God who guided Joseph, Moses, David, and Jesus is with you in your room right now, ready to carry the burdens you've been clutching too tightly. Ancient writings show that sleepless nights were often seen as spiritual battles. Historians still argue whether the Psalms of Lament were composed in solitary night vigils or in communal gatherings, but their words reflect sleepless souls pouring out prayers. And here's a quirky tidbit. In medieval monasteries, monks sometimes rang bells at midnight for vigils, believing that meeting God in the dark hours fortified them for daylight. As you feel the morning breeze on your skin, you sense God whispering, "Your anxieties don't have the final say." The worries that chased you through the night now dissolve like mist under sunlight. You can trust Him. Your tomorrow is already secure in His hands. The morning air carries a gentle bird song, and suddenly you remember Jesus' words about the sparrows. You glance outside and see tiny wings darting between branches, carefree, fed without sowing or storing. In that moment, you realize the lesson isn't just poetic, it's deeply personal. If God tends to these fragile creatures, how much more must He care for you, His beloved child? You feel your heart lighten, knowing that the God who painted the sunrise also arranges your daily bread, often in ways unseen. In ancient Israel, sparrows were considered of little market value. Two could be bought for a single coin. Historians still argue whether Jesus' reference in Matthew was literal pricing or symbolic. But either way, the message is clear. God esteems what the world dismisses. And here's a quirky tidbit. In Victorian England, sparrows were nicknamed God's minstrels because their constant chirping was likened to unending praise. You breathe deeper, savoring the crisp scent of morning grass, and let the sparrows remind you that your value in God's eyes cannot be measured by coins, status, or circumstance. The flutter of their wings becomes a hymn in your soul, echoing the truth. If He feeds them, He surely will care for you. The light has fully awakened the world now, and with it comes the echo of Jeremiah's words, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord." You feel the weight of those words settle into your heart, as though God Himself leans close to whisper that your story has never been random. Even when you feel exiled, lost, or forgotten, his plans weave unseen through every detail. Like Israel in Babylon, you may find yourself in places you never wanted to be. Yet even there, his hope breathes like dawn. Historically, the Babylonian exile in 586 BC scattered Israel and reshaped its entire faith life. Historians still argue whether Jeremiah wrote his promise before or during the exile, but what's certain is that his words gave light to a nation in despair. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some exiles hung harps on willow trees by the rivers of Babylon, refusing to sing until they remembered Zion. Yet, Jeremiah urged them to keep hoping anyway. As you listen to the morning sounds, outside distant footsteps, rustling leaves, you sense that your own exile moments are not wasted. God's promise covers even these hard places. His plans are still for peace, and his sunrise reminds you that a future of hope is certain. The morning stillness deepens, almost like a holy hush, and you remember Paul's words in Philippians. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, present your requests to God. You breathe it in, realizing that peace doesn't arrive because your problems vanish. It comes because God's presence steadies you right where you are. The still air outside mirrors that same calm, as if creation itself whispers, "Rest. Your Father is near." In the bustling Roman city of Philippi, believers gathered despite pressures from society. Historians still argue whether Paul wrote his letter from a prison in Rome or Ephesus. But either way, his message was born from chains. And here's a quirky tidbit. Roman prisons often had holes in the ceiling to let in a shaft of light, which might explain Paul's imagery of divine peace breaking into darkness. You glance around your room. The light is softer now, more golden, touching walls and windows as though blessing each corner. That same peace can settle over your thoughts. You realize God is not asking you to understand everything. He's inviting you to trust Him. And in that trust, His peace becomes your morning song. The morning sun now feels strong on your skin, a steady warmth that reminds you of Isaiah's promise. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. You picture yourself rising above heavy burdens, no longer trapped in the valley of worry, but lifted into clear skies. Just as an eagle rides the currents without exhausting itself, you sense God teaching you to lean on His strength instead of your own. The sunlight becomes a symbol. Today, you will not faint, because His Spirit carries you. In the ancient Near East, eagles were revered for their keen sight and unmatched endurance. Historians still argue whether Isaiah used the eagle metaphor because of Assyrian war emblems or simply for its natural majesty. And here's a quirky tidbit. Eagle feathers were once placed in quivers beside arrows, believed to bring speed and accuracy. Yet Isaiah flipped the image, showing strength through reliance, not violence. You inhale deeply, the scent of warmed earth rising as the day unfolds, and you know renewal is possible. Just as the eagle trusts invisible winds, you can trust the unseen hand of God. your strength is not gone. It is being remade in His presence. The day continues unfolding, and your heart rests on the comforting truth that Jesus understands every weakness you carry. You picture Him walking dusty Galilean roads, weary from the sun, hungry after long days, even moved to tears at a friend's grave. Suddenly, your struggles feel less isolating because the Son of God Himself stepped fully into human pain. The morning air that brushes your face reminds you you are never alone, for He knows exactly what it feels like to be you. In the first century, high priests were considered distant mediators, cloaked in ritual and separation. Historians still argue whether the book of Hebrews was written to Jewish Christians in Jerusalem or Rome, but its bold claim was revolutionary. We have a high priest who sympathizes with our weaknesses. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some rabbis taught that angels never fully understood human tears, which makes Christ's weeping in John's Gospel all the more powerful. You take in the sound of sparrows again outside and realize those small cries echo your own. Jesus hears them, and He hears you too. His empathy is not abstract, it is intimate. And in that shared humanity, your burdens feel lighter beneath the morning sun. The morning grows brighter still, and in your heart you picture a tiny mustard seed resting in your palm. Jesus said that even this smallest seed of faith could move mountains, and suddenly you realize it's not about the size of your belief, but the greatness of the God you trust. You don't need towering confidence to see change. You only need to place what little faith you have into His hands. As sunlight warms the floor beneath you, you sense that seed already beginning to grow. Mustard seeds were common in ancient Palestine, used both for spice and medicine. Historians still argue whether Jesus' parable referred to the black mustard plant or the white variety, but both begin as minuscule specks that sprout into towering bushes. And here's a quirky tidbit. In medieval gardens, mustard was often planted near roses because people believed its strong scent protected blossoms from pests. You breathe in deeply, as though inhaling courage itself, and remember that small beginnings often hold divine surprises. Mountains of fear, doubt, or impossibility may look immovable, but the God of dawn delights in shifting landscapes. This very morning, your tiny seed of trust is enough to open the way. The morning sky arches wide above you, and into that vastness pours Paul's assurance: nothing in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God. You let those words wrap around you like sunlight spilling through every shadow. Neither fear of tomorrow nor wounds of yesterday can sever the bond of His love. You realize that even when life feels unstable, His embrace is unshakable, steady as the rising sun. In the Roman world, separation was often final banishment, exile, even severing of family ties. Historians still argue whether Paul wrote Romans during his stay in Corinth or later in Rome, but the letter's sweeping vision of God's inseparable love remains unmatched. And here's a quirky tidbit. early believers carved small fish symbols on walls to remind each other of Christ's love, even when they feared discovery. Imagine whispering those promises in catacombs while candlelight flickered like morning rays underground. You glance at the light streaming brighter now, filling every corner of your space. It feels like a metaphor for God's relentless nearness. No crevice of your life remains untouched. You exhale, knowing His love holds you fast, and nothing, absolutely nothing, can pull you from His care. The morning stands in full glory now, and your heart recalls the psalmist's words, "Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning." You think back to the shadows that felt endless, the tears that soaked your pillow, and realize they were never the final word. Dawn always arrives. The golden light pouring through your window is more than sunlight. It is God's promise embodied, declaring that mercy is new today. You feel your spirit rise, lighter, freer, carried by the truth that joy is already on its way. Ancient Hebrew culture marked days from evening to evening, meaning the morning was literally the sign of a fresh beginning. Historians still argue whether Psalm 30 or 35 carried the original phrase about night weeping, but both echo the same truth. Sorrow is temporary, hope is eternal. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval churches rang bells at sunrise to remind villagers that yesterday's sins were covered by new mercies. You close your eyes, savoring the warmth, and you know that today is not a repeat of yesterday's despair. The night has passed, the morning has come, and with it, God Himself assures you that everything will be fine. And now, as the morning settles into its gentle rhythm, let your heart slow down with it. The sunlight no longer rushes across the sky. Instead, it lingers, soft and golden, like God's hand resting quietly on your shoulder. Every breath you take becomes a reminder that you are carried, not by your strength, but by His endless love. Let the sounds around you, birds, breeze, or even the hush of stillness become a hymn of assurance. You are safe, you are seen, and you are held. As you step into the hours ahead, know this: God goes before you, beside you, and behind you, and His presence will never leave your side. May this peace follow you into every moment, and may His blessing guard you all the way through.